Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Post-PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendes. Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Post-PhD. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me Sara Thompson. Sara has a decade of professional experience working with others to help them reach their public speaking goals. While completing her PhD in theater and performance studies at the University of Maryland, she realized that academia wasn't the right path for her and started exploring other options of what she could do with her doctoral training. While at Maryland, she taught her department's oral communication course and soon discovered that helping people find their voices was her passion. It wasn't long before she began her private consulting practice. After completing her PhD, she spent 5 years working in the nonprofit field while coaching and consulting on the side. In November of 2023, she went all in on that presentation coach and has been self-employed ever since. Sara has taught hundreds of people of all ages and from all fields, as varied as business, law, academia, the sciences, information technology, medicine, and the humanities. No matter what your background or public speaking experience is, she can help you. Welcome, Sara. Welcome, that presentation coach. Super happy to have you here today. Super happy we connected and we were able to, again, here on Beyond the Thesis, talk about this ordeal that is the PhD, the doctoral experience, and hopefully shed a little bit of light on what's outside the box. What's out there, and based on what I just, shared about you, also how we can find our voice as scientists, as researchers, outside the canonical academic research space. It's something that some people naturally are able to do, but a lot of us have to kind of, in a hurry, deal with finding that new voice as fast as possible by the end. And it's not such a comfortable or smooth experience as I would like it to be for everyone. So super happy to have you here today and to see how all those things connect, and also to share your own experience living this transition.
Yeah, thank you for having me, David. And I am super moved by your mission to help other PhD students do this, because it is a beast of a task to undertake.
It is. It is. And, I was giving a talk the other day, and, one of the things that I was reflecting while preparing was, it's been now, almost, it's going to be 15 years of my defense this year. And it's funny to feel or to put myself back in my shoes at that time and thinking that all the problems I was going through were just mine. And today, 15 years later, being in front of a room of young graduate students and now understanding that, well, even 15 years later, my podcast and people helping young researchers prepare for the after is still pertinent today. And I'm super, super thankful to have people like you who can bring different angles, different colors to this conversation, because I think each story, and this, you're from humanities, there's mainly, all books, or how can I say, most books follow the same arc. The hero, he hits a snag in the way, and then he's almost dying, and then there's redemption, and then there's the end. But each, so the arc can be similar, but then the details of each person who comes on the show are sure to resonate with a different subset of people, and that's why I'm almost 6 years into this adventure, and I always have as much fun, and I'm always as appreciative of people like you who say, okay, you know what, I'll spend an hour talking to this audience that needs inspiration.
They do. And we hear you. We know what it feels like. You're going to be okay. Is the bottom line.
You are going to be okay. So, Sara, you have all these years of experience. You did this PhD in theater. You started that presentation coach. So that was all very quick, the way I presented you, and and also it was very quick talking about you doing your PhD and then figuring out that academia was not the place where you were envisioning yourself after professionally. But do you think you can rewind, travel back in time and share with us a little bit of how that process went inside you? How was that? How was it that you lived through that moment of realizing that I'm on this long project, but today I understand that this objective or this goal that I have given for myself is actually not the one that's really aligned with me, because that's where a lot of people, need help and so often falter and end up even quitting their PhDs because of this type of reflection.
Yeah. So, I went to undergrad. I'm from Eastern North Carolina, and I went to college in North Carolina and went to undergrad to study theater. I thought I was going to be an actor. And probably my junior year, my third year, I sort of realized, this is not a good mental health choice to be in a career where you're just like judged for your body, essentially, is not right. So I decided that academia, that would feel better. Little did I know that was going to bring its own set of issues. But while I was in college, like just for fun, I had been taking Shakespeare courses because I had just always had an interest in Shakespeare. And my professor, Professor Russ McDonald, was my mentor. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. But when I was starting to kind of explore and think through other options, I talked to him about it, and he said, "Well, why don't you do a master's degree in Shakespeare studies?" And I thought, "Oh, well, that seems kind of fun and weird and cool." So once I decided on that, he was like, "Okay, and there's only one place you can go, and that's the University of Birmingham in the UK has they've got a school called the Shakespeare Institute, which is in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is where Shakespeare was from." And it's a tiny little school that is only for graduate students studying Shakespeare and Renaissance related topics. So like super focused, super nerd central. And so I went, I had a great time. I hung out after I finished. I didn't want to come home. And so I got my master's degree in Shakespeare studies. And then when I was sort of thinking about, okay, next steps, what's next? It just, because of the environment I was in, everybody was going to be an academic. So like, surely that's my next step. And I kind of had it in my head that for my sense of identity, my sense of self-worth, that I needed to be Dr. Sara Thompson. And again, doing a PhD in the States, I was much more likely to get funding and that sort of thing. So came home, got into the University of Maryland, which has a fantastic theater history program, and was very, very pleased with that. But again, very quickly, so later on, like in the past 2 years, I sort of came to the realization and was finally diagnosed with ADHD. So I'm one of those women who, yeah. And so it happens a lot. And I am curious about how often it seems to happen with academics or people in these sorts of spaces. And so now when I look back, I see a lot of the struggles that I was having with like focus and sitting down and getting research done and being easily distracted, feeling overwhelmed, not knowing where to start, procrastination, like all of that stuff it makes a lot more sense now. But for me, the big thing that made me realize that I wasn't happy in the academic space was that I always felt guilty. I always felt like I could be doing research. I could be working. I could be writing. If I tried to read a book for fun, I was like, well, why am I not reading this book that I need to read for my research? And again, just not mentally healthy for me. And then I'm incredibly grateful. We had a faculty member, Dr. Heather Nathans, who is now at Tufts. She's an American theater historian. She did like a 1 credit hour professional development course for the theater and performance studies graduate students. And in that course, I think Heather saw the writing on the wall before a lot of other people did, that academia is not what it has historically been as far as like job security and being able to find work and things like that. Sorry, my cat has just joined us.
Fine.
So
what's his name or its name?
Her name is Patsy. So you'll probably see her little tail here on the side. I see
the tail, yeah.
So, and one of the assignments, but part of it was, okay, what do you expect when you go for an on-campus job interview? How do you put together a CV? How do you put together a resume? What's the difference? That kind of stuff. But one of the assignments was she had us read, So What Are You Going to Do With That? Which I'm sure your folks are familiar with, but if you're not, check it out, because it's basically about moving outside academia and thinking about career possibilities outside academia. And one of the things the book talks about is like the importance of just giving yourself permission to do that. And that was really freeing, because I think up until that point, I kind of felt like I had gotten myself painted into a corner of like, gosh, I've spent all this money. I've got these student loans. I've been, I'm in my 30s and I've only been doing this. What else do I do? And so that really was a very helpful step and kind of made me start to think about some other options, and also how to, and this is a key for folks leaving the academia, is thinking about how to position yourself and the skills that you've gotten in your graduate studies to make them applicable in other fields that might not seem obvious right away. So that was kind of the start of that process. Being from North Carolina, I knew that Duke University has a continuing education or a continuing studies program, and they offer a fantastic certificate in nonprofit management that I could just do, here and there when I would come home to visit my parents. And now, of course, it's all online. But at the time, I was traveling to North Carolina for the classes. But that gave me a really good foundation, and it sort of set me on a path to like, be able to sell myself in nonprofits, but also to learn skills that ended up becoming very helpful. So the other kind of key part of my transition away from academia really comes down to like my graduate assistantships that I had. So I had 5 years of assistantships through my department with teaching and various departmental graduate assistantship things. And that's where I started teaching the oral communication course to undergraduate. Like, it was a general education. Everybody had to take it. And that was really kind of the moment where I was like, oh, I am seeing an obvious difference in my students from the first day they walk in to the last day of the semester. And that's a really cool feeling. And I hadn't felt that when I was teaching them the history of Shakespeare and performance. Not the same kind of like...
Yeah, the outcome is not, the metric is not so easy to quantify.
Yeah. And so that was kind of the start of things. I also realized when I first agreed to teach the class, I was like, oh yeah, sure, I can teach 18-year-olds how to put together a PowerPoint. I thought it was super basic, and it very quickly I realized how much other stuff was involved. And so that was one part of it. But then the other thing, after my departmental assistantship ended, I applied for assistantships outside in other areas of the university. And I had 2 years of assistantships in student affairs, which was awesome. So, and again, I highly recommend to folks, particularly if you're thinking about not going the traditional like professor route, look at assistantships outside of your department, because I had 2 different assistantships that were both amazing, taught me so much. I learned so much about other area and kind of like real world applications for things. And again, then when I was applying for jobs and things, I could put it as I had work experience that was not strictly academic. Yeah. And so, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling on about this, but it feels like a long and winding tale.
Well, you're telling, because I feel like you're doing that because the time overlaps for these different things, and you couldn't really tell them linearly, but they're all part of this kind of transition experience. So doing the assistantships in your department is let's say a logical step to take. Why was there a need in your department for those presentation skill trainings, and where did the mandate come from? Was it something that already existed before, and you just kind of were the next person to do it? Because first, I find it super valuable for students to have that early. But I'm just wondering, in all of that, some of it seems more logical steps that you followed, but then once you decided to go outside, you must have had some sort of reflection that led you to look for that, and also that made you gravitate towards the student services. I just wonder whether you have some reflection on that, on the why of teaching exactly what you were teaching, because it feels like it really informed what came after and what you do today.
Yeah, so I think maybe the year that I started my PhD, the university had first introduced an oral communication general education requirement for undergraduates.
Okay.
So departments all over the school were coming up with courses that they could offer as a gen ed fulfillment. And it originally, in the theater department, it was called The Art of Communication and Presentation. And it originally had been taught by MFA performance students. And then they graduated and they didn't bring in another class of performance students. And I thought, sure. I mean, I did undergraduate in theater. When I was in an undergrad, I had to take an oral communication class, and I was snippy about it because I was like, I am a theater major. I do not need to learn how to be a good presenter. And sure enough, I learned tons, and it was a really foundational experience for me. But so when they needed more people to teach the course, I was like, actually, that could be pretty fun. And I would get to do some theater, like rolling around on the floor, making funny noises stuff to like help warm up our voices and our bodies, but also could get some experience doing something slightly different. Again, I had no idea that it would be so transformative or foundational, and in many ways kind of be the piece that I feel like makes my path in life make sense. Because I think that was one of the things I struggled with a lot, was like, why have I done did I just waste my 20s and 30s? Like, why am I here now? So, and then when the assistantship that I was promised, like as part of my offer from the university, when that ended, I was not done with the dissertation. So I still needed tuition remission and things like that. And so looking outside, I applied for lots of different things, but there was the University of Maryland has a thing called the Art and Learning Center. I think it's got a different name now, but it's an on-campus like studio, and people can take art classes and dance classes, and they have like a pottery studio. And so it's just a really cool offering for people on campus who want a creative outlet, who maybe are not in courses for that kind of thing. And that was the offer that I got. And I think they appreciated my background in the arts and my, there's something to be said for theater people and the ability to plan events and put things on. And so that was a great intro into the world of student affairs. And then the year afterwards, I applied and got a position as an advisor for the student entertainment events, which is the group of, it's kind of like a committee of students who plan all of the big singers and comedians and speakers and stuff who come to campus throughout the year. And again, that was another really interesting thing that kind of helped beef up my event planning resume. Because if you plan a concert, 2 Chainz was the big rapper artist for anybody who's a 2 Chainz fan, who came the year that I worked with that group. So planning that is an enormous undertaking. And so that was, again, just super helpful, applicable skills to have and to boost that resume. So, yeah. And again, just kind of further solidified for me that I did not want to be sitting in a library doing research for the rest of my life.
One thing that's really kind of popping out for me from what you're saying, and it's a word that you used one time, but I think it's key, and it feels to me, and tell me what you think, that once you had that course and then that you read, what are you going to do with that? You introduced this word, and it has 3 letters, and you mentioned it one time in the last 2 minutes, which is fun. You introduced fun in the universe of possibilities of what you could do. Do you agree with that? And what's your reflection on that?
Yeah, I think I had been trying to fit myself, again, when we thinking outside the box, I'd been trying to fit myself into this box.
Yeah.
That I thought I was supposed to be
very square, tiny.
Yeah. And I have met the most wonderful people. Like some of the greatest people I've ever known have been people that I've met who are academics, friends that I have to this day and hope to always have. But I was enjoying them. I was enjoying like a lot of the culture pieces that go along with academia, but I was not having fun with the work. It was stressful. It was overwhelming. I'm sure many folks listening to the podcast who have gone through graduate school, I got diagnosed as clinically depressed at some point during that process. The self-esteem hit was just massive. And yeah. And so honestly, like just having somebody say, it's okay if this isn't the thing for you was really, really freeing and gave me kind of the opportunity to start thinking about different paths and different possibilities.
And to follow your inner compass versus a blueprint that was passed on to you from, someone else and from yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and particularly a blueprint that from the time I started the graduate school journey to the time I finished it was not the same machine. the blueprint I was following was not accurate.
The outcome was not the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And friends of mine who were getting tenure track positions were having to move to very rural areas. And that's not where I wanted to go. So again, it just seemed more and more like it wasn't going to be the right thing, and finding other options was going to be the way to go.
You actually kind of encapsulate in the beginning to the end of your PhD this reality that So I also met professors when I was in graduate school who today it's very different. When I got my PhD, I knew I was going to be a professor because universities needed people like me with who studied this or that, and today that's really not the case. It's legitimate for a graduate student to have this feeling of, I just got bait and switched, from the beginning of my PhD to the end of my PhD. I was dangled something shiny in front of me at the beginning, and then at the end, it's like, okay, you have your degree, bye-bye, figure out whatever you can. And by the way, 80% of you cannot have a tenure track professorship.
Right. You won't get jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. So and you kind of, for you saw that change throughout your graduate studies journey. And anyway, I think it's unfair, and that's why it's one of the reasons why I keep doing this podcast. Is I don't like unfairness, and I think things are getting better, more transparent, but there's still a disconnect between how many people are actively brought into PhD programs versus what's offered them at the end in terms of job security, whatever. Hi there. I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Sara Thompson. If you have questions and doubts about your professional future as a young scientist, as a PhD, you can now talk directly to me just like Andy did by joining the Beyond the Thesis community on Skool.com. If you go to skool.com/papaphd, you will find a safe space and a community of people like you figuring out their postgraduate school career journey. And you will have ample opportunity to talk with me directly, to ask me your questions on live coffee time sessions and on weekly Q&As. Additionally, you will find courses and also have the opportunity of having one-on-one calls with me. So remember, skool.com/papaphd. See you soon. That being said, today we're going to talk about creativity in terms of figuring out what you can do after. The first thing that you said is, be cool, you can do something after. The second thing that you said is, and you kind of didn't say it directly, but it was like in the undercurrent of what you were saying, which is, you will not have wasted your time doing your PhD if you don't stay in academia. And that's very important to say, because it's something also that has a very can have a very negative impact in people's mental health and self-image, etc., etc. Each time you widen your circle a little bit, there's more chance for serendipity, but also for learning more and for gaining experience that differentiates you, let's say, in the job market. The further you go from your comfort zone, the more things can happen and the more you can be creative. But I still have a question to do with that certificate that you took for nonprofits. What was the reflection on that? Because it seems like it's a more structured thing. There's a very particular goal, a very particular ecosystem that you're kind of launching yourself into. Can you talk about what was your reflection to go into that? And that's something very important. How did you feel like what I did before is going to be useful in this space? Because that's what people also have a lot of challenges is, well, but in my case, I worked in cell biology. Why would a nonprofit need me?
Right. Yeah. And that's a great question. And I spent a lot of time, and I've worked with people on resumes and things like that. And so I've helped lots of friends and myself figure out how to position themselves based on skills rather than roles that they've had. To me, nonprofits, when I was thinking about what lit me up, like what excited me, it's always been helping people in some way, shape, or form, whether that, when I was going to be a professor and teaching students. And I truly thought when I started the nonprofit management certificate, my thought was that I would go into like arts administration. Lead a theater company or something like that. And it was really happenstance, again, broadening my circle. To fit my last year of writing the dissertation, I made the decision, like, I have to not have a job. Like, if I'm going to be able to finish this, damn dissertation, it's got to be the only focus. Because when I had assistantships, when I was teaching, it was so easy for me to get distracted and I'm a big productive procrastinator where you're doing something that needs to get done, but it's not really the big thing. And so I moved back to North Carolina. I moved in with my parents. It very quickly became clear that I was not going to be able to write in their house either. So I joined a co-working space. And I mean, that was the catalyst for my post-PhD career, really, because I met a whole new group of people who had nothing to do with anything I'd ever done before, really, and started to make friends. And it just so happened that Habitat for Humanity of North Carolina, which was the state support organization for Habitat affiliates, their office was in the co-working space at the time. And I got to know the staff there. And it was a dog-friendly co-working space. And one day I was walking my dog out front, and the executive director of Habitat, we had become friendly. He looked at me and he's like, "Hey, you get a job." And I said, like, just as a joke, like picking on me, because I'm like out walking the dog in the middle of the day. And I was like, "Well, I'm trying. You got one?" And he goes, "Actually, do you know anything about communications?" It's like, yes, I do. In fact, I wrote a dissertation partly about communications and marketing. And so then, we had a follow-up discussion, and he was like, "Actually, please apply for this." And so I went through the whole application process, but it really was happenstance. I feel very lucky that I was able to meet folks who could look at my resume and like we could talk through it, and I could say, okay, because this is the thing, right? These are the skills that if you get a PhD, you have research skills, you have critical thinking skills, you are able to problem solve, and you can apply. Again, theater also, you think on your feet. You have a task, you figure out how to get it done, kind of stuff that really is helpful. I also benefited. One of the courses I took for my PhD was a learning outcomes assessment course. So familiarity and knowledge of assessment and surveys, like that. If you can do a good survey, that's a skill that very few people have. So again, the ability to think about, and I do this a lot with my clients, where we will think about things that you've done and then take a step back and go, okay, well, what are the pieces of that? What are the things that have come together to make that thing that you accomplished possible? Oh, okay, you're brave, you're hardworking, you're comfortable with being uncomfortable, like things like that. Thinking about the pieces rather than the product can often help you when you're in that process of like trying to apply what you've done to other activities.
Walking the dog interaction is awesome. It's a great like turning point. It's almost like TV series or book like. but it's an interesting point to hang on to for this reason, which is, and I don't know, have you ever done improv?
I did, yeah. I mean, as a theater person, you don't get out of theater without doing some improv.
Okay, well, and I don't want to go too much into it, but I've heard again and again that there's this rule of you never say no, you always say yes and that was a yes and moment, because you could have said no, I'm an academic, and you said this. If this person is seeing this potential in me, I'm going to say yes and I think often because we can have, we can be prone to imposter syndrome. Our reaction often may be, and mine would have been, let's say a long time ago, oh no, that's not for me, I'm not, and you said yes and do you have any reflection on that, and do you remember how then you positioned yourself after that? Because the yes and is a very quick thing that happens serendipitously. How then did you prepare for then actually talking about potentially taking this position? Do you remember?
Yeah, so the more I thought about it and the more I read about the position, I was kind of like, okay, so from doing the nonprofit management certificate, I had I had because this is the thing, nonprofits do not work like other things do, like other organizations do. And so having some familiarity with that was a good foundation in that way. But I also, and this is another recommendation that I have for folks, I also had been working with the Career Center at the University of Maryland. And there's a graduate student career counselor in the Career Center who I had been meeting with about how to position my resume outside of academia. So if you're on a campus, see if there is that resource. There should be something. You might not be able to have like a specific counselor for graduate students, but there should be something on. Absolutely. They'll be able to direct you in. So again, taking advantage of the resources that you have at your university is the first step. So I already had some experience doing that. I had already kind of thought through how I might position myself. And then this role that they were hiring for was a communications and marketing person. And my dissertation, I wrote about how sort of small Shakespeare theater companies could market and bring in hipster audiences, so the postmodern hipsters. So it was it was really cool, but it also, I learned a lot about marketing in that process and communications. Yeah, and then I didn't know much about Habitat for Humanity at all, but I have always been interested in social justice issues, and affordable housing is obviously increasingly an issue for folks. And so that was something that I was definitely interested in learning more about and getting involved with. And then the other thing that I think really, like, once I had the job, I was in the job for 2 weeks when Eastern North Carolina was hit by Hurricane Florence, which was a hurricane that caused tons of flooding and stuff like this, I think 2018. And literally 2 weeks after I started this job, I was on calls with Habitat for Humanity International, like planning the on-the-ground North Carolina disaster response. And the whole time I'm on the phone and I'm like, why am I here? Like, what? How is this what I'm doing today? And again, the imposter syndrome of like, why are they talking to me about this? But then realizing that like almost everybody in nonprofits has come from doing something else. Like half of nonprofits are just flying by the seat of their pants. And again, I really credit my theater experience and kind of the improv, yes, and of going, okay, well, here's where we are. So let's figure this out. And it really was, yeah, I loved it. I mean, again, having to learn new things and experience new opportunities is something that is really exciting to me. So it was scary, but it's also another thing that I got from the PhD program is if I did that, I can do this. If I wrote that dissertation, I can do
work on this problem that is different,
exactly.
but I can learn. That's amazing, because that's exactly where I was going to go. So from what you just said, the feeling I got was too. So when this conversation happened, a door opened. So this person said, "Oh, why not you?" And then you were like, "Me?" But so you kind of went to the path of, I'm going to give this person in this situation the benefit of the doubt. And now I'm going to actually look, oh, why not me? Actually, I'm going to ask myself this question. And then you're like taking stock of, okay, this can apply, this that I did can apply, this experience. And then you kind of fell into this comfort of, you know what? I'm comfortable enough to actually try it. So, and I think this is important. The second aspect, you just mentioned it, which is, as people who've gone to the PhD, who've been researchers, we can adapt to and launch ourselves into different and varying and unpredictable projects because we've done we've done like 5 years of it or 6 years of it or whatever, and got 8, there you go, of being buffeted left and right by the winds of the winds of the PhD, and then coming out alive and thinking, okay, I did this, and that also gives us confidence to do whatever after. But where I was going with this, it gives to me, and it's interesting that you're a theater major, because it gives the feeling to me that today in 2024, like we said, the PhD should not be seen as the path to professorship. It is the path. If you want to be a professor, of course, you need to go through that path. But there's many different other places in society where you can be useful. And I think it would be useful to change the way it's sold to people, but also the way you live through it. It's kind of like the difference between a noun and a verb. In the past, it's like, oh, you do a PhD, you're a researcher. And today, I think you're more of a chameleon who can, in different spaces where you end up landing, bring all of that you've learned, not the specifics, but the resilience, like you said, the pragmatism, the way to think deeply about a problem. Sometimes it's the way of finding a problem where you know there is one, but people don't know where it is, and that it'll be useful throughout society. So, and that made me I said, it's interesting about theater, because theater is a lot about that. Today I am a queen, tomorrow I am a unicorn, and the day after I'm a mafioso, whatever the audience needs. And I think we are equipped as PhDs, as having gone through that adventure, to don different costumes in society and be comfortable with it, be how can I say, confident doing it. But it's not how we come out of graduate school, at least today. Confidence of being out there is not something that is a given for everyone, and often it's the opposite. The way you come out formatted is to a lot of self-doubt, a lot of comparing yourself, and not a lot of, that's it, taking stock of, oh, look at all I gained as a person, as a citizen, as a grown-up, that I can then use for the rest of my life. Anyway, that came from what you said.
Thank you.
I hope
Good.
it's not too...
You nailed it. And I think, again, once I let go of this is the only thing I can be in order to make this worth it, it was a lot easier to walk in with confidence. And I'm not saying that I started off the outside academia thing with tons of confidence, because I didn't, but it's very much got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Like, let's see what happens. And so something I would say to listeners is keep putting one foot in front of the other. You're going to figure it out. It'll work itself out. You've just got to keep trying things.
And trust yourselves.
Trust yourself. Yeah. Pretend you know what you're doing.
We have the past guest here of the show, David Giltner. Hi, David. And he's saying, yes, this is a great way to view a PhD. Thanks for being in the audience today. This is a great conversation. I'm having a lot of fun, and I think I'm having some aha moments here with you, Sara, and it's a pleasure. We are getting. I just saw how much time has passed. It has gone really fast, but it's when you're having fun chatting, I think time somehow accelerates a little bit. Your service that you give now is called That Presentation Coach. And you know what? Actually, what I'm going to do right now is ask you to share with people who are watching, who are listening, if they, after this interview, want to reach out to you, see what you do, and explore some of that. What's the best way? For those who are listening, because those who are watching, there's some links here on the screen. But for those who are just listening to the podcast, what's the best way to reach out to you? What are the platforms, etc.?
Yeah, so you can check out my website, thatpresentationcoach.com. I'm also on Instagram at thatpresentationcoach. I think I'm fairly easy to find, and now SEO should pick me up pretty quickly. But where kind of all of this stuff that we've been talking about brought me was that everybody now has a side hustle. And so my side hustle while I was working for this nonprofit was public speaking coaching, because I had that experience. I loved doing it. It is very clearly something that people need help with. And I started doing that, and just increasingly, again, when we talk about the fun, that's where I was having fun. It's also where more and more the PhD was making sense for me, as in, like, this is a skill set that I developed through doing the PhD, through a life spent in theater, but also those critical thinking skills, the ability to listen and kind of synthesize information from a variety of, because, like, I mean, my clients are, everything from a casino management professional to, like, right now I have a neuroscientist working on, like, Parkinson's disease research, to, like, marketing people. So one of the things I love the most about it, and the thing that I find the most fun, is that I am constantly learning about fields that I know nothing about. And so that's a great thing for curious people, for ADHD people, for whatever. And so I was increasingly loving that. Last November, so about a year ago now, the organization that I was working for did some restructuring. They let go their full-time staff. So I didn't have a job anymore. And I was kind of like, okay, now's the chance. Like, now's my opportunity to, again, really lean into the thing that I loved, the thing that I feel like sets me apart and gives me, like, this is what makes me make sense, is this work. So I use a combination of, some theater concepts, some theater, vocal warm-ups, and how do we project, and how do we make sure that our body language is warm and open and things like that. But then also some of the nerdy academic, like, communication theory stuff. And then I get into, like, the woo-woo, how do we build confidence? How are we authentically sharing our energy with others? And it's just, it's a combination approach. I think also the thing that I think sets me apart is that I'm not, and this, again, for your listeners who are regularly presenting, perfection is not the goal. If you're a very smart, very driven person doing a PhD, my bet is that perfectionism is something that you come up against within yourself a lot. And so basically accepting that it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, is one of the big things that I work on with people, and I think that people really appreciate. So I work with clients one-on-one for working towards a specific, if they've got a conference presentation or a big meeting that they're prepping for. But then I also have clients who come to me and they just say, I am so terrified to speak up in the weekly staff meeting. How do I do that? I help people prep for job interviews. Again, it's always something different. And then I also do group trainings for, organizations that need to help their sales team or their HR training folks or whoever. And it's a great way to meet tons of wonderful people and to also feel like I'm making a positive impact. And again, seeing the difference in someone when they first come to me to after 3 to 5 sessions even is really makes my heart happy.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's a very, very heartening, and and in academia, it's rare that you have an outcome, that is in such a short time span that you can actually, see the effect of what you do. Now we're reaching the end of the interview. I don't want to take too much of your time, but we talked about something before hitting record, and it is that putting yourself out there after the PhD in the job market outside academia as something that relates to what you do and what you help people with, which is to find your voice. People who I talk with, graduate students, they are in search of that voice. First, they think they don't have it. because I was working towards this, so I don't fit here. I'm square and this is a round hole. I don't fit. And the whole exercise with them, that's important, and it's more difficult for some people and less for others, but there is some work to be done for everyone, is finding that voice. And you told me 3 elements of your that you teach the people you coach that I think were really applied really well to this idea of, okay, yes, I did a PhD in this or that domain. Yes, I specialized in this technique, or that subject, but I need to be able to be in another setting, tell that story in a way that's not academic speak, but that will still tell my audience what I did, and that will allow them to connect emotionally, intellectually to what I did without like being hit with too much jargon or too much information, etc. And before I kind of sum up my take homes from the interview, I'll let you talk a little bit about that, because I think it was really, really cool the way it applied.
Yeah. So the 3 things that I say a good speaker needs, the only 3 things, are confidence, authenticity, and preparation. And perfection is not on that list, but confidence, authenticity, and preparation are. And so that's what I work with folks on. But the flip side, and the place that I think those of us who have been in a particular field and kind of that tunnel vision there struggle with, and I've worked with lots of academics on this, is thinking about the audience. Who is my audience right now? What does the person I'm talking to care about? If they leave your presentation or your job interview or whatever, and they're going, well, so what? What does that have to do with me? Then you've not done the job. I am a big fan, and something you've noticed throughout this interview is that I'll call out something that your listeners might really benefit from is this. Drawing those lines, making those connections. We cannot underestimate the fact that our audience might not be making those connections for themselves. So for us, as academics, it might feel obvious, but for the general public, it's not. And so making sure we are applying, I helped a friend of mine yesterday. They're doing an on-campus job interview for a math job, and they're doing a presentation on gerrymandering and like math and using math to figure out that kind of thing. And something that we really focused on was inserting, like, guys, this matters to you because of this. Like, we just had an election. You're going to have elections in the future. Here, like, making those connections so obvious for that audience. Because where my friend was coming from, the connection was very clear. Like, of course, like, yeah. And so putting in that super blatant, this is why this matters to you. It helps, and it helps your audience think to yourself, okay, if I'm going to leave this presentation and I want them to remember one thing, what's the one thing I want them to take away? Then you're going to call out that thing. You're going to put road signs around the thing, and you're probably going to say it at least 2 or 3 times to make it clear to them. So not being afraid to be obvious when we are speaking to folks who are not in our field. When we're talking about our research, it's really easy to nerd out and go down a rabbit hole of, I think this thing is so cool and interesting, and forget about the fact that it doesn't need to be cool and interesting to me. It needs to be cool and interesting and applicable to the audience that I'm talking to. If we can keep the audience so what in the front of our mind when we're prepping a presentation, it is revolutionary, both for the presenter and the audience.
And same thing for someone in a job, in the context of a job interview. So yeah,
a job interview is a presentation.
It's a presentation too, and it has an audience, and so it means that you need to do some homework before of trying to know. It's not easy, but there's ways to try and know the audience as best you can, or approximate by talking with someone who has the same position in maybe another company that you might know. But it's really interesting seeing the HR or whatever person who's you're going to be meeting as an audience that needs to be at the center of your attention and at the center of your preparation, because attention is in the moment, preparation comes before. And I think that is key. Very, very, very cool.
Yeah, I love it. And it's revolutionary for people's presentations. It really is.
Very cool. Sara, sadly, well, I'm super happy of this hour we spent together. The hour is reaching an end. And I'm just going to quickly try and recap what, the moments that kind of stuck out to me in terms of being key to you, to your journey, but to people who are listening too. And I'll walk back from what we just said. So whenever you're having conversations, based on what we said, whenever you're having conversations, maybe overt career conversations with someone who's planning to hire you, but sometimes serendipitous conversations when you're walking the dog or you're in an elevator with someone who's curious about what you do. Go the yes and path and accept that person as your audience at that moment, and keep them at the center of your attention. Because you also need an audience. You need to listen to their reactions too. And try to move away from, okay, I'm going to give them my speech that I give every time about my research and that. So it needs to be a two-way thing. The person needs to be listened and seen as much as you do. And I think that's very, very important. And when it's the first time you're like, let's say, interviewing outside academia, you might be so stressed that you're kind of in this other state that you're kind of not really there. Try to learn how to be there, because it's important to be fully there. And I think that's important when you're acting too. So this thing about presence, listening, and having it be a two-way conversation with empathy in there for whoever's on the other side. I think, it's not exactly the words you said, but I think it's a way to kind of encapsulate that aspect. So the serendipity part. Now, from that point, I'm going to the next point, which is the only way to win a lottery is to buy a ticket. So the only way to increase chance moments, the probability of having serendipitous moments of meeting someone new who might, change or widen the path for you, is to widen your circle of people of organizations you help, because organizations are made of what? People. So if you help an organization, you're going to know more people. So of course, when you're in graduate school, often you'll say, oh, but I don't have time. Like Sara, like you said, within the purview of what you were doing, there were these assistantships you needed to do, and you just found a creative way of adding some fun to them, and also of adding some like exploratory aspect to them of something new, something a little bit on the side compared to your thesis subject per se. So widen your circles a little bit, and then you're like increasing the probability of having chance interactions that might lead to something to I'm not going to say a job, because that is not true, but to you being open to then having that person in the elevator asking you something, and you saying, yeah, oh yes, and I might be the person to help you with that. So we're going to that part, and then if the last thing is, and I hope that today after this conversation it happens for you, is that certainty that you're not alone, feeling that maybe academia is not for you. You're really not alone. There's a whole community of us out there. There's maybe that stellar student that you see on the other lab, in the other lab, is actually going through the same, although for some reason things maybe are going better, or they're publishing and you're not. you don't know what's happening inside their hearts and inside their minds. So the beginning of it all is this realization that, yes, I'm doing this PhD. No, I don't have to be a professor. And yes, society will need me, and I will be able, with all that I've learned, to find a productive and fulfilling place in society. And that would be the 3 points that I take home from you. I don't know if that resonates with you, Sara, but I think it's going to, it's going to be helpful for whoever is in that situation of doubt and who listens to our conversation. I hope I did a good job kind of summing up what we talked about.
I think you did. I think if you had told little first-year PhD Sara those things, they would have all been really helpful information to have, rather than having to like stumble around and figure it out in my head.
Excellent. Sara, this was a real pleasure. I'm really, again, happy we connected, and that once I suggested the subject, you said yes right away, and I think this was a great conversation. Thank you for the great energy you brought to the conversation. For you who are listening, you can see it, but Sara has a great smile, and really brings, at least to me as an interviewer, brings a lot of good energy, good vibes, and I hope they pass on to you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening to episode 14 of this 6th season of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, with me, David Mendes, and my guest, Sara Thompson. If you have questions or comments about what we discussed in this episode, you can now bring them directly to me in the brand new Papa PhD community on Skool.com. Simply go to skool.com/PapaPhD in one word and discover the course material, the weekly live sessions, and all that I share with a community of people like you trying to figure out their professional future after the PhD. See you there.